Okay, so now when we talk about using research and reason in education, we've talked about peer review, and then we've talked about replication of results. The third thing you want to think about is converging evidence. And I kind of started talking about this at the end of part two. So, methods in research investigations can include all kinds of different studies: case studies, experimental studies, surveys, qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods. It doesn't really matter. There's all kinds of different research studies that can be done. But all of these methods are used as a way to establish what's called converging evidence. Converging evidence means that there is a preponderance of evidence to support a particular theory. So if the data from many different studies are similar, then we say that they converge. So in my other example, I had my study, I publish it, I hope another kindergarten teacher tries to replicate it and get similar findings, and then they publish it, and then another kindergarten teacher does, and so on and so on. And that's replication. But then let's say that someone reads my study, which was a qualitative study, and then they change it a little bit, and then they do a quantitative study somehow on it. Or then maybe my study was a case study. Maybe someone else does something that uses survey data instead of doing a case study approach. And so what I hope happens over time is that other people not only replicate my study, but look at the same topic that I looked at, how to use technology in the kindergarten writing program, and tries different approaches to studying that topic until all of a sudden there is so many studies and so much evidence that this teaching method is effective, that then teachers can feel like, oh yeah, I should be using technology in this way in my kindergarten classroom writing program. So that's what converging evidence means. This is in direct contrast to what we often see in our society. My example there is the news media, right? So get on social media for a little bit. You've all heard about fake news or whatever. And so it's hard to be able to discern what has really gone through a rigorous process so that we can believe the information that's being shared and what is just, people's opinions or even sharing information that's not grounded in any kind of facts. And that is concerning. Instead, as good consumers of the news, we need to find sources that we think are reputable and that are known for sharing factual information to help us make informed decision. Just remember, one experiment or someone's opinion should not be used to state these overarching general set of findings that should guide all instruction. Now, luckily for you, a lot of times classroom teachers are like, whoa, this sounds really overwhelming and I really don't know if I can keep up with all of this. Hopefully you have people in your district who are being responsible consumers and making good choices for the curriculum that's being used. But this whole new approach of the science of reading is talking about this. We want to make sure that we're using research-based practices when it comes to teaching kids how to read. That we're not just doing what's always been done because it's the way it's been done before. And so, to tell you the truth, a lot of what we've been sharing so far in the first 2 weeks of this class is bordering on that, is this good research practice to use? Speaking transparently, educators are starting to say, should we be using leveled readers to teach kids how to read? Should we have a gradient of text that we are using? Or is it because it's just the way it's always been done that's why we're doing it in our classrooms? And so if this sounds interesting to you, I encourage you to get involved as a future classroom teacher. Start reading the research on using leveled text. Start seeing what kind of studies are being published. And then after you become a teacher, be willing to analyze your own future students and think about how they are using leveled readers so that you can add to the data and the findings so that future teachers can really be making good decisions about what's best to teach kids about how to read. And Students are always changing, right? And so sometimes at the base of it, we're like, yeah, kids are kids. But sometimes maybe I live when I live in a different setting, kids learn how to read differently. Or maybe when they have different factors, kids learn how to read differently. Just be open to thinking about that and challenging yourself to really think about what are the most effective ways to learn how to teach reading. And do I feel like there's evidence to support what I'm doing in my classroom? Or is it just a fad or trendy? Or is it just because I'm doing what someone told me to do? So that's a real takeaway that I want you to have from this, is just to learn how to become a good consumer of the instructional materials and methods that are used in your classroom. So here's a couple of slides of summary. So what happens if I find that the method my school district wants me to use has not been peer reviewed? Well, if it's not been peer reviewed, then you got to find out the link between the opinion of the writer and what is existing peer review research to determine whether or not the writer's opinion is consistent with evidence that's out there. So maybe there is a curriculum program that you're using and you can't find any studies published on it. Okay, well, can you find people who are actually using the methods you're being asked to use that have been published? How do I do this? Well, at the end of every article, it's going to be a reference list that cites other articles. And that's a great place to go and then start looking and seeing what kinds of things are this person citing, or who else are they reading, what authors, so that I can do the same. And like I said, it's always at the end of the article. Just like when you have a bibliography or a reference page, in an article that you read in a journal is going to have a reference list. And then if you can't come up with some good evidence, or if you feel unsure about it, especially if your school district's going to invest a lot of money in something, you need to go talk to your principal or your curriculum director about it. Do the authors provide a significant amount of original research? So you're going to find out, like, hey, is what they want me to do in my classroom based on more than just one published study? Or really, is this a brand new idea? You can also ask, do the authors cite work other than just their own? I'm pretty leery when I read something and then when they cite it, they just cite like, oh, and this is other things I've written about this topic. That kind of tells me like what you're thinking about has not really been replicated by others. But if I see different names coming up around the same topic, then I know it has been replicated. Always ask if the journal that you're being reading or asked to read has been peer reviewed. And then ask, how is this theory behind the method connected to other existing research consensus in the area? As a teacher, you don't really want to say, has anyone proved that this method doesn't work? Like, you don't want to be negative about it. But instead you can say, hey, have the advocates for this new technique provided sufficient proof that it works? So if you can have a mindset where it's not just like, well, tell me if it has ever not worked. Don't think about that. Instead, try to think about, where's the proof that this does work rather than the not work? It's just a different way of thinking about it. But in general, I just want you to realize that teachers should hold accountable original authors to things that they publish and to the responsibility of providing evidence for claims, particularly when it comes to instructional methods and materials that they want you to use in your classroom. All right, so just to summarize, you are thinking about, as a good consumer of research, is what they're asking me to do been published in a peer-reviewed journal? Has it been replicated by others? And is there converging evidence about this topic? If so, I think you can feel pretty confident about using that method in your classroom.